All right, Dr. Strasser, we are live with this applied project proposal. Thanks for taking the time, first of all, to meet with me. Um, I'm titling this online course for learning leaders, a strategic training for older adult technology learning. And I know it's a mouthful, but this is a course that would be very useful for those in the workforce who are responsible for budgeting or purchasing software, designing, training, and even deploying and training others on whatever software this company is purchasing. Specifically, the narrow scope of this project will address how older workers learn technology. And so I wanted to explain why this was important and why this was timely. We know that COVID-19 really exacerbated what was already a trend in labor force exodus. Statistics tell us that 70% of the 5 million people who left the workforce during the pandemic were 55 years and older. And that disproportionate number was attributed to the fact that they were having the worst outcomes in health. They were greatly affected on the health side and basically just pulled out and left the workforce and found alternate ways of income or took early retirement. This coincided with the Great Resignation. Now you've heard about the millennials leaving the workplace. And so this caused a huge knowledge and labor gap in the workforce. So companies now want to understand why this demographic is leaving. They want to find ways to retain older workers, and they want to recruit even the ones that left. They want to go back and find those that they had and aim for new talent from this pool of older workers. Why? Because older workers, they have the knowledge. They have a knowledge base accumulated over years. They have an expertise, and they have a different type of work ethic. They tend to be more stable, tend to be longer term on the job. So we want to be able to counteract any negative perceptions of new technology use that this demographic might have by providing a strategic training plan. This training plan is built on like a three-legged stool, which will help them develop a strategic process to improve all of those training outcomes. The first post on this stool is understanding older workers, understanding how they engage with technology, how they consume it, and what are their learning preferences when they are being trained. Second thing is to look at the design of our curriculum so we can build effective learning that is geared towards older adults. And finally, put all these components together to have a comprehensive learning program. So we begin with the introduction, and I want to approach this introduction with a attack on the myths, the stereotype, the biases. And so I would teach this in a way that we have a myth, what we know, what we've heard, what we think we know about older adults, and then what the research is telling us, what we have found through extensive studies that are timely. So we would start with addressing perceptions versus reality and give them evidence-based assessments of these older workers in the labor force and how they engage with technology. Second, under this idea is to look at the access and the role of leaders in the workplace. You know, they can't get to the technology and they won't be given certain pieces of the technology unless leaders facilitate that process. So we'll talk about tangible support, which is in the form of budgets and education programs, and the psychological leadership support. For example, workers as being endorsed and being encouraged by leaders. You know, I found out something really interesting in the literature. The leader's attitude is definitely a contagion. You know, when leaders say, well, these older workers, they're really not going to get it, and they don't like to be trained anyways. They don't like technology. That mood and that emotion gets caught by the worker directly or indirectly, and older workers then put up resistance and then question their ability to learn. So we want to hit that on here on how leaders can influence their workers in their engagement process. And finally, addressing the learning preferences of older workers. Older workers have a unique, I call it cognitive personality, which they superimpose on their learning. So they have attitudes and preferences that don't necessarily translate into learning apprehension. Just because I'm an independent learner doesn't mean I want to be left alone. When we move on from the engagement piece, we'll talk about instructional design. We want to design all curriculum with an andragogical lens. That's Malcolm Knowles's adult learning principles, and talk about adult learning preferences, that cognitive personality style that I referred to earlier. We want to make sure that our learning is learner-centered, all right? Learner-centered considers their life experience and what they bring to the table. And then we'll make sure that the modalities include hybrid modes that make the learning more flexible, or what we call agile learning, that can pivot as situations change. Another key ingredient is pre and post learning assessments. I'll be talking a little bit about needs assessment and auditing workflows to find out what exactly needs to be included in their training. Ultimately, this comes together to be a successful learning program if it is contextualized. So we'll talk about situated learning, where the students are having to solve real world problems, simulations, so to speak, that can increase their learning capacity and also increase the team's shared knowledge. They will also look at an authentic learning model, which has communication embedded in it. Communication that says leaders are supporting this. We have actual programs and resources, and we want to hear back from you about how you perceive this technology to be either easy to use or useful. That's the technology acceptance model that we want to bring to the table, which would make this more authentic, since there's a dialogic exchange between the learner and the learning institution, in this case, the workplace leaders. And finally, we want to make sure that their learning is successful by using hybrid learning. You know, we got caught in that trap in the 80s and 90s of auditory learners, hands-on learners, and visual learners, which turns out to be a myth. We are all that. So we want to make sure that we see multiple modalities, and we'll give them exemplars on how to increase the media richness in their learning modes, which has a positive outcome. The last thing I wanted to show you was the overall strategy. Again, there's an introduction to the worker, how they engaged, how we designed the curriculum, and ultimately what our strategy looks like. So far, I have built a module on Google Classroom, a course, excuse me, with one module there in this screenshot. So we'll start with deconstructing myths and move on to the design factors and the ultimate strategy. I'll use graphics like the onion model of learning style theories. This is a concept from Lynn Curry in the 80s that talks about our preferences for instruction are built on how we process information, which is ultimately built on our cognitive personality style. That personality style model comes from the big 5 personality traits in psychology, which I am contextualizing in a learning environment, the OCEAN acronym, right? So if they, for example, have a high degree of neuroticism, or let's say anxiety about learning, then we need to find out ways that we can offset that by having them do an assessment, and we begin to customize the training around these personality traits. This is the learner-centered approach, just some dimensions that leaders should consider, and we'll include this as collateral in the course. And this is a learning leader who finally says, I wish I had known about this applied project earlier, so I could have, designed my programs a little better. So that's my presentation.
So that's not a picture of you saying, I wish I had known about this applied project sooner.
My feelings, but yeah, someone else's image.
All right, so really quickly, and then you can turn off the recording after this question, but so Claire, just so Renan and I are on the same page in terms of deliverables. So give me that when you actually go to submit your applied project, give me the clear deliverables. And I know you and I have talked about these, so I'm good with it. And my guess is Renata is too. But
Okay.
Just so she and I are on the same page, what are you going to be handing in to us when you submit your applied project?
I will submit a literature review with a
Right.
thematic analysis on all of my findings that are going to be incorporated into the learning. The actual slides for this course are a hyperlink as well to how to access it on Google Classrooms in real time. The executive summary that you've already received, and any kind of collateral material like a handbook or handouts that I would include. So for example, those graphics, I would include those as handouts so that they can use these to work out things with their team. So the course slides, links to the course, the executive summary, the literature review, and any handouts that are included.
I think it's great.
Okay.
It's good.
Okay, let me go ahead and pop off the recording. Thank you, Dr. Kalaches. If you have any questions, Smith, if you could please let me know. Thank you.